are recording. I just again rearrange a few things on my share my desktop. Everyone can see my desktop. I've opened the training document. It's sitting at the table of contents, which always reminds me too, as I'm going along, if it sounds like I'm five screens ahead of what you're seeing on your end, please let me know. Send me a chat message or unmute your phone, *6, to let me know to slow down. I don't want to leave anybody behind. I know WebEx can sometimes be funny, and I'll be 5 or 6 screens ahead of what you're seeing on your end. So again, please let me know if that ends up being the case. This session number 6 of the 7 sessions we're offering for the 5.8 upgrade coming up in October. This particular session is going to focus on 2 primary topics: changes that are upcoming that are related to Worklog and Tasks, and changes related to Background Business Processor, BBP. Let's start with Worklog and Tasking. This first one, we do have to just sit here and look at this picture, first page of the training document, because I'm not able to demo this particular one. I don't have Report Server running on my laptop, so we're just going to discuss this enhancement and look at this screenshot here. Version 5.8, we are now able to create EPM tasks from an EHR report. An EHR report is run either from the report server or through BBP. We can take EHR report and ultimately create EPM tasks from that report. So what we're seeing here on the screenshot is an example of maybe an EHR report listing patients that are allergic to shellfish. The report was run from the report server, and once the report comes to the screen, if the user clicks the Assign Tasks icon here on the toolbar, the report toolbar, this window will open up, and from that window, they're able to select an EPM task type and assign it to the appropriate EPM users. Or important note, I should say, the source type they select has to be a chart source task from file maintenance. So into file maintenance and go to my task types. And I'm done by type here. Any of them set up here in file maintenance as a chart source type are available for selection from an HR report. On that particular enhancement. EPM tasks from the HR report that was run from the report server. Along those same lines, we can also create EPM tasks from an EHR report that was generated using BBP. So this one I can go in a little bit further with you. Let's go into BBP. Let's look at a job within BBP. I've got memorized reports. Okay. Here I'm seeing a package in BBP. I'm going to the Jobs tab, and one of the jobs here is a memorized report, so related to this particular job type, memorized reports. Down under my job parameters, I've selected an EHR memorized report. When I select an EHR memorized report, I can again select a chart type task in the next field just below, an EPM task type, to be assigned to the appropriate users. I can define an appropriate priority, a status for all the tasks, so on and so forth. And for those that are familiar with creating tasks from reports, let's say when BBP generates this report, we end up with 50 patients on it, 50 different patients. Then we're ultimately going to create 50 of these tasks, one for each patient on the report, and those 50 tasks would be assigned to the users designated here. So the ability to select a task type, a task status, task priority, assign it to users, so on and so forth. The main piece being the ability to select an EPM task type for an EHR report. Patients that are allergic to shellfish on the report, we need someone in EPM to do something with those people on that report. Question? In addition, create EHR tasks from EHR Report in BBP. So back to BBP, I'm just going to cancel, go to a different package here. I've got this one where, again, one of my jobs or one of the jobs in the package is a memorized reports job type. We're selected an EHR memorized report. When you select an EHR memorized report, you get an option called EHR Task at the top of this list. All these are EPM task types. At the very top of the list is one called EHR Task. Again, you can assign it a status, a priority, who should be assigned to. The only difference here is these tasks, again, let's say there's 50 patients on the report. These 50 tasks will be assigned to these users that can find these tasks in the workflow module in EHR. Example, we're running an EHR report and assigning or creating EPM tasks. Tasks would be seen, of course, in EPM from the Worklog icon. I want to show you something here. If I create a new job, a new memorized report job type with a package, memorized report, here's my list of memorized reports. I'm going to go find an EHR report. My EHR reports, I don't have a lot of them, but again, allergy to shellfish. Picking that EHR report allows me to select an EHR task. Task the workflow in EHR. In contrast, if as I'm creating that memorized report type, an EPM memorized report, I don't know, I'll randomly pick here, type, see how EHR task is not listed at the top. Not to create EHR tasks from an EPM report. You can create EHR tasks from an EHR report. You can create EP tasks from an EHR report. You cannot create EHR tasks from an EPM report. And again, that's all summarized in the training document. I know that sounds like a lot and it gets kind of confusing. But again, I did want to give you that visual here that by selecting an EPM memorized report, I do not have an option to select the type called EHR task. Tasking from EHR reports, whether those EHR reports were run from the report server or within BBP here. Mute your phone, *6, #6 to ask a question. Feel free to send the questions via the chat board. I don't see anything coming in on the chat board, so I'm going to give it just a second for any verbal questions, and then we'll move on to the next topic. Okay. New version 5.8 is task subgroupings. Us that have worked in EPM quite a bit, we know we have various types of subgroupings. We have location subgroupings, payer subgroupings, provider subgroupings, reason code subgroupings. We have subgroupings all over the place in EPM, and essentially they're a way to group something like locations or providers for reporting purposes. Well, something similar now in version 5.8 when it comes to tasks. We're able to subgroup tasks to facilitate reporting, just like other types of subgroupings, and also to facilitate managing those tasks within EPM. What we're going to do here is work our way through all the file maintenance, all the setup leading up to it, and then we'll see how the subgroupings ultimately work in EPM. To minimize the training document, let's start out in file maintenance. Price preferences first. To the preferences, and same place we caption other subgroupings like the provider subgroupings, location subgroupings, so on and so forth. Right here, circling with my mouse, are two new fields in version 5.8, task subgrouping and task subgrouping 2. I've chosen to caption mine as task responsibility, just as examples, and task type of follow-up. These will be seen by users in EPM. This is how they display on reports, And again, you'll see that as I get a little bit further in. But basically, I'm just giving names to a couple of fields here in Enterprise Preferences. Keep in mind, since we are in Enterprise Preferences, whatever captions I decide upon are going to affect and be the same for all practices in this enterprise. So again, they're called task responsibility and task type of follow-up. This piece of the setup would be under master lists. We have a new master table called task subgroupings. This is the place we go to create our location subgroupings, provider subgroupings, so on and so forth. Just another master list table. And again, for purposes of my examples, I've created things like back office, front office, insurance versus invoice versus patient. Maybe certain types of tasks are manager responsibility. So we all know it's pretty easy to create something in master lists. It's nothing more than a description. I've got my master list created. We can go to our task types table. 45-day insurance balance as my example. Right here at the top, I'm circling with my mouse the two task subgrouping fields. Now, the captions from Enterprise Preferences do not display here in this table in file maintenance. You'll see those captions come into play in EPM here in a little bit. This particular type of task that maybe is set to auto-create based on certain criteria here is considered to be a office task. Here's my master list. Practice normally would work this type of task, and it's related to insurance. Another task, maybe this one, 45-day invoice that balance. Again, that's considered a back office task. It's not related to insurance, it's related to invoice. So both of the task subgrouping yields on a couple of my task types here for example purposes. Quite far. Okay, just flip through the document, make sure I'm not missing anything. There's one more piece of the setup, and then we'll go into EPM. Section the two fields in Enterprise Preferences first. List to a new task subgrouping table and create pick list options there, then linked to task types here. Setup is in Practice Preferences. So my practice and go to Preferences. Topic on the left. They've added task subgrouping 1 and 2 here in Practice Preferences. They're available to make required fields. Again, for anyone that has worked with EPM Tasks before, here in Practice Preferences, anything that I turn on or select with the green check mark over here in the Required Fields section, I'm essentially turning those into red required fields from an end user's perspective. So I want to require them to always fill in details on every task they work. Do I want them to put in a subject on every task they work? And now in 8, do I want them to add task subgrouping 1 and or 2 to every task they work in EPM? Okay, the only options on this entire tab that are new in 5.8 are these two right here. Subgrouping. All these we've always had all along. That one. Okay, go into EPM and see subgroupings play a role in EPM. Worklog icon, a lookup or a search criteria. So over on the right-hand side, I see task responsibility and task type of follow-up. Those are my two captions from Enterprise Preferences. Maybe I'm interested in finding all not yet started or in progress tasks that are office responsibility. It finds 13 of them. There are a bunch of 45-day insurance balances plus a couple others. If I narrow down my filter criteria a little bit more and say show me back office insurance related tasks, find it 19 down to 10. That's 3 back office are probably set up to be patient related tasks. So 13, 3 of them are set up as back office patient, the other 2 back office insurance. If I blank out this one here, search with it blank, sorry, I didn't mean for that to come up here, all 13. So again, what I'm demoing here is they can be part of your lookup from the Worklog Manager icon. You're working on a task. You open a task that's been assigned to task subgroupings. They also show here on the Edit Task window itself. So I can see the task I've just opened on Carly here is a back office insurance type task. And I can change that if need be. Now, changing the task subgrouping fields is basic security. We'll get to that in just a moment. So necessarily every user is going to be able to say, well, you know, this isn't a back office task, this really is a front office task. No, it's truly a back office task, and maybe I don't want all users to be able to change that. There is a way to prevent them from making changes in these two fields. And I'll show you that in System Admin in just a moment. Quite far. Reports. We all groupings are a reporting mechanism, whether they're relation subgroupings, provider subgroupings, or now task subgroupings. On 3 task reports, in fact, I've got a memorized one here I think I'll use as a shortcut. I've got a version of the task details report. First of all, columns tab, they've added subgrouping columns, so you can include that information on a report that's generated. Also available as filters over on the left-hand side. Responsibility, that's my subgroup 1. I can report by selecting from my subgrouping choices. Task type of follow-up, that was my caption for task subgroup number 2. Again, use it as a filter if desired. So you can include them as columns on the report, and you can use your subgroupings as filters on the report. The report just to show you what the columns themselves look like. Again, on the report you will see the captions from Enterprise Preferences. And what I just showed you here on this memorized version of a task details report also applies to the other 2 task reports. All task reports have these same options and functions, filters and columns related to task subgrouping. A minute ago, let me close my report. Go back to my blog. Maybe go back to looking at those in progress, not yet started, back office related tasks. Go find them. Open one up. I'm going to go about these being able to be secured down through System Admin. In other words, if you don't want certain users to be able to change these once they're assigned to a task, then let's take security away from those users. So I'm going to pop into System Admin next. System Admin for a group of users. On the right tab, on Operations, and then Tasks. It is a new option in 5.8 called Task Subgroupings. I can yes, access rights, which essentially means as I'm working a task, yes, I can change the task subgroupings. A user that's logged in that does not have access rights, it will look like this. I'm just going to take a shortcut and show you a screenshot here in the training document. So if it doesn't have security to change those, they're going to be grayed out fields. So they'll open a task to work on it, and those 2 fields are assigned for reporting and management purposes maybe, and maybe not all users are supposed to change them. So here's an example of a user that does not have the security to change them. There. So far. Okay, I don't see anything on chat board, and I'll wait just another second or 2 to make sure before I move on to the next topic. That is security related. So back to System Admin. I'm sorry about that. Log Admin. And let me get out of some of this. I'll keep that there as well. It's got too much going on here. into a group of users. Again, for users, under Operations, Tasks. There's one here in version 5.8, modify task type, either yes or no. I'm in a group that has yes access rights, so when I'm EPM and I open a task to work on it, I change the task type here. I can change it from one type of task to something totally different. My assumption or my guess is maybe that's been a problem for clients where users may open a task and change it to be something completely different than what it originally was. So now with that new option in System Admin, if we take it away from certain users, field will be grayed out. So when they open that task to work on it, they're unable or not able to change that task type. Question? Okay. You're off tonight. Not even a single chat message coming in. Somebody send me something, even if you say, hi, I'm looking at this chat board and nobody's sending me anything. If there are questions, I'll take that as a good thing. Thank you, a couple of you there. Required fields can now be based on task type in version 5.8. All right, I'm going to go back to file maintenance and let's start again in practice preferences. Settings that affect all tasks in the practice. When you're in practice preferences, settings you make here for tasks are going to apply to all tasks in the practice. And I'm coming back to this required fields section that I'm circling with my mouse. And I've only got one field turned on as being required from a user's perspective, assigned to, apply to all tasks in the practice. And to kind of know that, for example, I happen to be in a patient's chart and I want to create a task on a certain encounter in their chart, and assign to a user in EPM, I go to the chart, to that encounter, right-click on it, go to the task option, and if I pick maybe a claim edit type task, you can see that assigned to is a red required field. Task type is always red and required. You can't create a task in EPM without first picking the type of task. So be this red field here. The other one that's set up to be red required according to my practice preferences is this field. So it doesn't matter what type of task I pick. I'm just kind of randomly, going from one type to another to show you that they all require that practice preference who to assign this task to. Now, in the text table, so in addition to what we've set at the practice level, required here at the practice level, we have individual task types. In the task type table, open. There's a new tab in version 5.8 over here on the right-hand side called Required, where I can enable additional fields for this particular task type. So make additional fields red and required to the end users for this specific type of task. Here's the one, the assigned to. This is the one coming from practice preferences, and watch what happens if I try to turn it off. I'm clicking on it right now, and it's going nowhere. If it's required in practice preferences, it's going to be required here. Every task type in file maintenance, and turn it off from here. If I don't want to be required, I got to go turn it off in practice preferences. So in any practice level required fields cannot be here at the individual task type level, but I can certainly turn on or off additional fields to be read and required for this type of a task. So here on my 45-day insurance balance, in addition to the practice required assigned to field, oops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. In fact, I don't know what I just did. In addition to practice defined assigned to field, I've also enabled to be a red required field and details to be a red required field on this particular type of task. So back again to that encounter, if I want to assign a task to someone in relation to this encounter, if I I have just the one required field from practice preferences. Unless I pick 45-day insurance balance, now I've got additional red required fields. So this is pretty cool, I think. The ability to force users to fill in certain pieces of information now based on the type of task that they're working with. Questions? Okay, I'm in the chat board and I'm not hearing any unmutes, so I'm going to keep on going. Again, I appreciate your time tonight. I know it's late for some of us, so let's plow through this, but please, if you have questions, I do want you to ask. Related to tasks, a slight change in file maintenance. In that option in the task types table, called Discontinued Feature Auto Creation down here. In version 5.7 and prior, in fact, let me pretend like I'm creating a new task type here in file maintenance, start from scratch, and maybe an encounter source task. Auto create of this task type. When I turn this on, 5.8, this second option is the default. To explain, or it's not coming out of my mouth right, I'll show you a picture in the training document in a second. In version 5.7 and prior, when they mark this checkbox, indeed is the default. 5.8 checkbox, this option is the default. So again, in the training document, just for comparison's sake, on page 18, version 5.7 and prior, you select checkbox, it defaults to indefinitely. In version 5.8, you select that checkbox, and for a certain number of days after the task has been completed is selected by default. While we're here in 5.8, they did add this little yellow notepad over off to the side. This is something that was always confusing, not only to clients, but also to trainers and people in support and everyone else. To discontinue options, whether it's indefinitely or this option here for 90 days, whichever button they select here really only applies to tasks that are auto-completed based on settings or parameters that have been enabled here on the auto completion tab. So if a task is set up to auto create and assigned to certain users, if something happens to that encounter before the task gets worked, such as gets created or a form template gets printed or the balance gets paid off to zero, the system will automatically auto complete that task. These auto completed tasks that really reference this discontinue feature. And it's always worked that way. That's not new in version 5.8. They've just tried to clarify it now with the yellow notepad. So just a quick recap, the only new things I'm showing you here in 5.8 are, box defaults to a different answer than it does in previous versions. And we have a yellow notepad reminding that the discontinue parameters over here pertain only to auto-completed tasks. And tasks autocomplete, as we all know, based on parameters I've selected on the autocomplete tab. EPM next. Continue feature. In EPM, if I go to Worklog and I say, show me my tasks, type here, and I open one to work on it. Since here, now that I've opened a task and I want to manually complete it, my complete date and my username here, completed by me on this date, and I don't want this same type of task to create on this patient again, when I select the discontinue, version 5.7 and prior, the default is indefinitely, just like it was in file maintenance. Now in 5.8, when they mark discontinue feature, it defaults to the other option of until, which requires them to put in a future date. So it certainly doesn't stop them from going to the indefinitely option. The new just happens to be until, and they would specify a particular date. Questions on that? Again, just a difference in defaults. So in training document, and for one, we're on page 20, so the very next page, in version 5.7, discontinue defaults to indefinitely. In 8, discontinue defaults to until. This discontinue feature, and slight nuance or something that's slightly different. I'm looking at a listing of 45-day tasks on various patients, various encounters, and I'm going to select multiples. So I'm just selecting 9 or 10, and open one of those 9 or 10. We hopefully that when you select multiple tasks like this, you can update all of those selected tasks with certain pieces of information all at the same time. For example, I can give them all a status of in progress if I mark a checkbox right there next to status. I can change all those tasks I've selected to a priority of high, as long as that little checkbox. I can call these tasks to me, admin next gen, as a little checkbox. What I've shown you so far here is not new. We're able to do this in previous versions. They've added a little checkbox for the discontinue feature now as well. So if I want to update all of these, maybe I'm flagging them all to be completed. I don't want the system to create or discontinue future auto-create of this task type until a certain date that I specify here. Update them. This is all that's new, this little guy right here. I never even realized it until development showed us this little enhancement. I didn't realize that we didn't have that little checkbox for the discontinue feature before. So we've also update multiple tasks, all these various little checkboxes along the way until we got down to discontinue. We weren't able to update multiple tasks. Now we can in version 5.8. Questions on that? Okay, I'm going to not actually save those changes. Worklog-related item. Let me go to my Worklog Manager here, and let's say I'm looking for a particular type of task. And approval tasks that have been completed. Here are several completed tasks. Is this completion reason column right here? If I happen to be looking at a bunch of completed tasks, I can see the completion reason used on each one of those tasks. Version 5.8, we didn't have this column. So if I was looking at a list of completed tasks and I wanted to know what reason was used on them, I'd have to open up each one and go to the Task Info tab and look at the task completion reason here, one at a time. That could be a huge hassle if I'm looking at 50 tasks and want to know what completion reason was used on those 50 tasks. I'd have to open each one at a time. Now, 5.8, I can just include this in my view and no longer have to open to see completion reasons. Kind of small enhancements, but they're nice enhancements. They're handy. Again, I never realized we were missing that column in this view. It sure as heck is handy to have it here now in version 5.8. Okay, next we are going to an enhancement that's related to transaction approval tasks. Transaction approval tasks were actually new a year or so ago in version 5.7. I'm not going to turn this into a full training on how do transaction approval tasks work. In a nutshell, they're to say or to set up file maintenance a mechanism that says if a user enters a certain transaction of a certain amount, maybe a large adjustment of $100 or more on a patient's encounter, I don't want them to be able to post that transaction until management has reviewed it and okayed it. That's kind of what transaction approvals are in a nutshell. We do have a separate training document from August of last year that goes clear from beginning to end on setup and functionality related to transaction approvals. So if anybody on this line right now needs more info Transaction approval tasking, that's another document. That's last year's enhancement. What is new in version 5.8 are a few things related to transaction approval tasks. We're going to start out in file maintenance. Again, practice master files, task approval profiles. We can say, or where we start the piece of setup that says, if a transaction is entered on an encounter from these selected locations by email, these specific individuals in this specific order, these that are basically in the queue are going to be in the queue to approve something like a large adjustment. It would go to manager first. Once it approves it, it goes to Diane. Once it approves it, it goes to the practice administrator in that order defined here. So again, nothing new here in 5.8 that I've discussed so far. What is new in 5.8 with these approval profiles is the ability to not only include individuals as approvers, but also task work groups. So administrators is bold, individual person, Mark is an individual person, administrators is a task work group from back here in maintenance that might include 2 or 3 people. So 5.8 is the ability to include in task approval profiles task work groups. They do bold on the left so you clearly can tell when you're selecting a group of users as opposed to an individual user for a profile. That, including task work groups, those work groups might include more than one user as part of task approval profiles. That's new with these task approval profiles. In version 5.7, we're limited to 5 approvers. We moved over 5 approvers and then tried to move over a 6th. It would bat me in 5.7 and say you can't go beyond 5. Well, somebody must have needed more than 5 because now in 5.8 we can go, to 10 approvers within a single profile. Again, it can be a combination of individuals. So there's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 are actually groups of approvers, task work groups again. So we can go up to 10 individuals and or work groups within an individual profile. And if I try to add that 11th one, that's that now in version 5.8. Only 10 users are allowed in the list. So again, quick recap, the 2 main enhancements when it comes to task approval profiles is the ability to include task work groups, bulk groupings of users. And enhancement to the profiles is the ability to include up to 10 approvers in a profile. Any questions? Okay, now these task work groups come into play in EPM. Again, Worklog Manager. New field, we can now use task work groups as a lookup search criteria. So just as I was doing before, I'll go find me all in progress, not started tasks, filter, 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 pick and choose what I want. On the assigned to here, if I scroll down to the bottom individual users, sorry for I'm not sure what that looks like to you right now on your end, you eventually get to task work groups. You can search for a set of tasks based on my filter criteria that are assigned to task work groups. So the place that's new in 5.8, assigned to work groups. Over the side. Also, if I scroll down beyond individual users, you have thinking of task work groups again. So if I'm interested in looking at transaction approval tasks that have been approved by a specific group of users, I can use that in my search criteria. ahead and say show tasks that are in my approval queue, go find them just so I can get a couple listed here. And also what's new is down here in the columns, if you scroll way over to the right-hand side to your approver columns, I see task work groups here. So that's one that I just highlighted. The first approver was Sally's supervisor. She approved that transaction. Then it went to Mark Manager. He approved the transaction. It is now in Administrators Group queue. That group might include the administrator and Ray Siegel and Elizabeth Porson and 3 other users. So any user in this group, the Administrators Task Work Group, is logged in right now, and they go to the Worklog icon and say, show me what's in my approval queue. We're all going to see the same task. Anybody that's in that group is going to see that same task. Questions on where task work groups come into play here from the Worklog Manager window. Either the Assign To field, the Apply field, or the columns themselves down here. You might see task work groups displayed as an approver based on the way the profile was set up in file maintenance. I don't have in the training document, and I just remembered it now, and I probably need to add it. We keep scrolling over to the right. In version 5.7, it went to Approver 5 columns. So who's Approver 5? What's the status from Approver 5? And is it currently in their queue or not? Well, now that we can go up to 10 approvers within a profile, we now have many more columns. We have columns for Approver 6, columns for Approver 7, 8, 9, and 10. So last session, do you have to right-click and turn on these additional columns? You know how in some places in EPM, right-click on your column headings to turn on, off certain columns? No, they're right-click, turn on, off here. They're automatically going to display in version 5.8. If someone ventures clear over to the right-hand side of this lookup window, they will see up to columns for up to 10 approvers automatically. Okay, let me next go into one of these tasks that we're looking at. And see task work groups here. And again, this is based on how the task approval profile was set up. It first went to Sally, then it went to Mark, and now it's out to the group called administrators. That might include the practice administrator, Ray Siegel, and Elizabeth Porson. So if of us 3 are logged in and looking at this, we are all 3 part of that group. We're all 3 able to see and do something with this same task. One thing I do want to mention is if I, maybe Ray Siegel, go ahead and approve this, Ray Siegel being one of the administrators, as soon as I hit OK, it's going to pop out of Elizabeth Porson and anybody else's queue that is part of the administrators group. So it only takes one user to do the approval to get it out of the queue for the other users in that same group. Hope that made sense. Any questions so far? Over here, I'm going to actually cancel, don't save my change, and go right back into it. Also new in version 5.8 are a couple of new approval statuses. So this middle one, version 5.7, an approver can either approve the transaction or deny the transaction. In version 5.7, 2 choices, approved and denied. In 5.8, we now have 4 choices, approved, denied, pending, and returned. I don't spend too much time unless you guys have questions on the approved and denied. Again, they're not new in 5.8. I'd rather spend my time on how does pending status or returned status work. If I select pending, this is a way for me, Ray Siegel, that happens to be one of the users in this group, to say this is pending my approval. Maybe I go speak to somebody else in the office or check into something or go talk to 3 other people before I decide to approve or deny this transaction. So pending is a way to at least flag it so somebody comes in to look at the task, let you know that somebody in the administrators group is working on it at the moment. The returned example, would kick it back to Mark Manager, kick the previous approver. So Mark approved the transaction, but when it gets to me, one of the administrators, I'm looking closer at that transaction and saying, why the heck did Mark approve it? I don't think he looked at this. He better go talk to that payment poster first. I can return it to him. By returning it to him, it essentially will remove his approval status and mail back to him saying it's been returned to you. Please review this again. I've done to help, kind of a chart view of some of these options. In the training document, we have this chart-looking table here on what page is this? 30. Differences between the 4 different approval statuses. Again, approved and denied, there's nothing new about either of those two from version 5.7. The top are the new ones. And again, if someone selects pending as their approval status, that task will remain in the current approver's queue. The task itself remains open. No email is sent to anybody. For those that are familiar with the way the emails go along with transaction approval tasks. This is in the current approver's queue, and email is sent to anybody else. If the user happens to select the status of returned, it removes it from the current approver's queue, the previous approver's approval status, back to the previous approver's queue, and that previous approver earned transaction email. Here's an example of what one of those emails might look like. I played with this at one point and was selecting returned. These are the types of emails that get sent in those instances. The subject of the email clearly says returned transaction approval task. So email going back to Mark Manager happens to have my email address. Everybody has my email address, so I can demo things like this. But I just wanted you to see an example of a type of email with a different subject when that type of status is selected on a task. Okay, pending moves it nowhere. It's going to keep in the administrator's queue. Somebody in the administrator's group is currently working on it. No additional emails sent. It doesn't get transferred to anybody else. Returned. Mark get that returned email we was looking at, so he knows he has to look at it again. It also removes his approved status. If we're back to his queue, we're removing his approved status. I do want to mention, if the person happens to be the first in the approval queue, like Sally here, she's the first one to get an email saying you need to approve this transaction. If the first person in line tries to pick the returned option, they're going to do something like this. Let me maybe so we can see it a little better. Approval status is not valid because you are the first approval required. Please choose another approval status. So that first person in the queue cannot use return. Anybody after that first person in the queue could have or potentially use returned. Questions? New statuses? Still related to that, I shouldn't have closed that. Let me go into that same task. On the History tab, the tab is not new. This is a tab that records changes that are made over time to this task. It's kind of like a significant event, so to speak, log. It's an audit log of what's been going on with this task. What's new in 5.8 is that they've added task field modified. No, I'm looking at the wrong thing. Excuse me. Action status changed. I'm sorry. These descriptions here, let me stretch it out a little bit. This is new in version 5.8. Task action status changed. And along with each of those, not only do you see the date and time and who did it, the task action status change will show what was it before, no approval, and mark to approved. So if we follow those along in this particular example, it went to supervisor. She changed it to approved. It then Mark, who initially no approval, he approved it. Then it went to who's this? Next gen, the administrator, who wrote it back to Mark, and Mark again approved second time. So these action status changed events or audits, whatever you'd like to call them here on the History tab, are what's new in 5.8. These four right here in my example. What was on that? Task work groups and reports. Details report. And task details, just these two reports here. I'm sorry, can't read my training document here. It's the task details report and the task. These bottom two reports have new filters on them in 5.8 that are to task work groups. The approve filter filter report use task work groups. Again, they're bolded. So on the assigned to filter, the assigned to, they're not in bold. I'm not sure why that is, and they also display with the practice name, but here's a task work group. So either assigned to a task work group can be used for a filter, or I'm wanting to run the report where the approvals are part of a specific task work group. Convert two of the task reports now by task work groups. Questions on that? Okay. Worklog and tasking enhancements in version 5.8. We're going to move on to BBP enhancements. 33 in the training document. Okay, in 5.8 BBP specific to the ERA directory import job type. When someone imports a directory, an ERA directory, and the directory could consist of multiple ERA files, those files can be moved to different folders based on whether they got processed successfully, whether they failed, or where they got partially processed. So not too far into this, let's go into EPM. For anyone that's worked with ERA before, you know a user in EPM here would go to the File, Processes, ERA Posting menu option, import an individual ERA file or a directory import. That directory folder might include many ERA files. This is the job type we're talking about in BBP, ERA directory import. Out to my desktop, to my files, and this is the best example. I blow up here, but I want to go past these errors to shoot kind of as an example. Here I am the user. I want to import a bunch of ERA files, so I'm using the directory import option. I brought to find the directory folder, and in that folder, we've got lots of individual ERA files. Some of them might be Aetna, some might be Cigna, some might be Blue Cross, so on and so forth. If I select them all and then hit the import button, I'm essentially trying to import multiple ERA files all at the same time. Well, some of these files might be successful and post correctly. Files might only partially process. Maybe one or two patients in one of these files process okay, but the other patients bomb out for some reason in a file, and other files may completely fail. Do now through BBP, if they're using BBP to import those ERA directories, so we're thinking specifically of the ERA directory import job type. I thought I had this set up. I do. I just went to the wrong package. In 5.8, move successful files, moved failed files, move partially processed files. So these folders were created in advance. So again, if any of these end up being successful, every patient in one or two of these files imports correctly, no issues found, those can be moved to a folder called successful files in my example. Others within that directory, if they bomb out and fail, they can be moved to a separate folder called failed files, and then others can be moved to partially processed files. They're just 3 different folders. And again, if I minimize all this, oops. Sorry, more open than I thought I did here, and get to my ERA file directory. I just created 3 folders out here, one called failed files, one called partially processed files, one called successful files, and I think I just moved that. Folders, and then you can route ERA files to these folders within your BBP package setup. That. All that's new here with this directory import job type are things to move successful, failed, or partially processed files potentially to different folders. This is all done and BBP is all done, I know I probably need to go to this folder and review files in this folder. Something's wrong with all files in this folder. I also need to go to this folder because those include files where some patients processed but others didn't. And totally ignore this file for the day because anybody that ended up in that file are okay. They were all successful. These are the 2 folders I need to go ultimately review and see what's going on with those ERA imports. Okay, next. Guy up here at the top of the BBP desktop, a server field. This is all servers. So what I'm seeing here is a listing of all packages that are set to run on any BBP server. If I drop down pick list, and pick a specific server, it narrows down and shows me only the packages that are set up to run on that server. If I search server, I'm seeing pages run to set up to run on it, and I can go back to all to see all of them again. We all know within the setup of a package, on the servers tab is where you're telling it which server do I want this package to run on. I have an example here of where I could run it on this server or the other. Now, the packages listed for various servers throughout our practice or workstations throughout our practice, I can clean up what I'm looking at, so to speak, by selecting a server up top to see just packages set up to run on that server. Question? That's kind of nice. Okay. Enhancement is in BBP is the ability to copy a package from one practice to another. So let me go to servers here so I get all my packages listed again. We always had the highlight an existing package, right-click, and copy it. We end up with another of the same package with the same practice. New 5.8 is now the ability to right-click on a package and copy it to another practice. So all of my BBP packages for my medical practice, I want this package to be copied to my ASC practice. I'm going to right-click on it, copy it to practice. To know which practice do you want to copy it to, I'm going to pick Ambulatory Surgery Center. And it eventually opens up our package property window with a default name of copy of billing and claims. What I'm going to do is, just for my own note to self here, I'm going to just add to this and say it was copied from my medical practice to the ASC practice. Get rid of the copy of verbiage up there. It's always a good idea in my mind, though, before you hit OK and consider this to be done, review and make sure you're running it on the appropriate server for the ASC practice. Go to the jobs, open each job. Make sure your job parameters are appropriate now for the ASC practice. You'll notice what it does do automatically. Any job that is practice specific, it automatically flipped it to ASC for me. In addition to that, review your other job parameters. You may need slightly different settings in the ASC practice for this billing encounters job. Any job that has a practice tab within it. Also, changed practices here. So remember, I went from medical to ASC. So within each job in this package now, they have all defaulted to run as practice ASC, and that has a practices tab also includes the ASC. But again, review each job would be my suggestion to a client after a copy, and just make sure you've got the appropriate settings. Maybe at the ASC you're dealing with totally different printers, so you're going to want to make sure any of the jobs that involve a printer, you've routed it to the appropriate printer for that practice. Slight tweaks that'll have to be made, but in general, that was pretty easy. All I did was right-click on an existing package, select an option called Copy to Practice, ASC Practice, the one I'm copying to, and I'm essentially done, aside from reviewing my job parameters. So if I go into my ASC Practice, we just copied a second ago from the other. That's useful, I would think, for clients that have multiple practices, or maybe are adding a new practice. They've got a bunch of BBP packages set for one of their existing practices. Now they're bringing on a new practice and want a lot of the same type of packages running for a new practice. Now we can copy them. There. Off mute to ask a question, or maybe somebody hung up. So I keep going. All right, the next new item, BBP in version 5.8, is the Generate Electronic Claims File job type. So back to my billing and claims package, because in this job package I've got a couple of jobs where we're creating electronic claim files. I'm going to open one of those. So this is specific to this job type, Generate Electronic Claim File. And what's new is down here under our job parameter settings, payer list, in version 8, you can select multiple payers. In version 7 and prior, you could only select one payer. You can have the check boxes. So I'm limited to clicking on a single payer. Now in 5.8, I can pick multiple payers within that job if I'd like. One. You got a group tonight. I haven't had a single question through this entire session. I hope you're all there and you're listening and you're not sleeping. Sorry, we're getting close to being done. I know, again, it is late for some of you. We're just about finished here. Just a couple more things to show you. Completely new job type in version 5.8 for BAT. The new job type in BBP, let's quickly review the bad debt process in EPM. When I turn encounters to a collection agency, I'd go to the File, Processes, Back menu option. I have here where I can select Collection Agency, Agencies, and a date. Select one or more agencies, an effective date, pre-list. Here's all the encounters that are pre-listed, ready to go to collections. Goes the report, I get the prompt, do you want to process these as bad debt now? The new bad debt process in BBP basically does this part for us. It takes what's already in your pre-list and just sends it to collections. So it's a pretty simple job to set up. I've got it in here, set up of it. Called bad debt process. And when that job type down below are the few parameters I have. One is pick your collection agency or agencies. just like we would in EPM. Second parameter is an effective date, just like in EPM. Our bad debt report, so I can print that to a particular printer if I want, or I can export it to Excel, to a particular file with a timestamp on that file name. I can email the report if need be. Not sure that's HIPAA compliant this day and age to be emailing reports with patient information on them. We can also save them as snapshots. Snapshots is something that I talk about in session number 5. That's a new feature in EPM. I don't want to get too bogged up in that now. You'll learn more about snapshots when you come to a session number 5. But this job type we're looking at, pretty simple to set up. Your collection fees, your effective date, and where your report to go, or to folder on your network in Excel format. That's all to it. And again, it's essentially replacing this process in EPM of looking at the list, which ultimately allows you to send to bad debt. Do have to be pre-listed here in EPM. That process has to happen in order for the new BBP job to pick them up and ultimately send them to collections, send them to a bad debt status. Any comment? Okay, and I think, but not least, I've said that a couple times now, so let me flip a couple just to make sure. No, we have 2 more topics here. we're getting there. Next new item in version 5.8 is the ability to delete individual package history records. What I'm going to do to demo this is go to one of my packages that I know has run in the past, and I should have some history for this package on the History tab. Go. What's new in 5.8 is the ability to, maybe I want to delete just this one history record here. I can work on it. Now, this is new in 5.8. In version 7, we only had one choice. In fact, we had no choice, and it happened to have been this one. Delete multiple history records for this package that are older than a certain number of days. What 5.8 is this option, the one up top, that allows me to delete just that selected history record. And for visual comparison purposes, what I did in the training document on page 39, like in 5.7, if you right-click on a history record in 5.7 and choose Delete from the menu, it opens up this window where your only choice is to delete history records for this package that are older than a certain number of days. And now 5.8, we essentially have the two choices. I can delete just the individual selected record, or I can use the other button, which is equivalent to what we always had in version 5.7 and prior. Okay, now last but not least is a change related to the eligibility requests job type in BBP. Again, what's new there, let's kind of review what an end user at a client using RTS eligibility requests, what they would manually do in EPM. They would go to the appointment list icon. And I need to run some eligibility checks on some expected appointments. Maybe specify a particular appointment date range. Maybe this of 8/9. Anybody has an expected appointment during this time frame for one of these types of appointments with this course. Find them. Right-click, ability inquiry, submit them through RTS. That's kind of batch eligibility request process in EPM. You're using the appointment list or the appointment lookup icon, filtering for a set of appointments, select appointments, right-click eligibility inquiry, submit. Okay, what's in BBP related to that? parameters here where you're able to select an appointment resource, an appointment event, an appointment status, and an appointment class. Just like we've all been able to do in EPM, we can pick a status, we can pick an event, a resource, and maybe a class. So what they've done in the BBP parameters is just made it more equivalent to the functionality we have here directly from within EPM. We could set up this for appointments with a particular provider or for a particular type of appointment or of appointments, status, desired, essentially recreating what the user might be manually doing in EPM. 1, 2, 3, 4 new parameters here within the RTS eligibility request job type. And that one. And of the evening. So what to do, I still have my eyes on that chat board for anybody that wants to send in any kind of a question on any of the topics we've discussed tonight. And give me just a sec. I see somebody is reminding me to please share the training document with everybody. I will do that. Let me do one thing first. I'm going to stop sharing my desktop. The recording, before I forget, I sometimes forget.